time. I know Martin seems to be on Aussie time still, so I'll try and rescue a bit of everybody's lunchtime. It's great to see everybody back at Integrate. Thanks for coming to listen to my session. We're going to talk about Serverless 360 BAM. It's something we've been using in the real world for a few years. Sorry, is the mic okay there? Guys at the back, I think I'll use this one. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we've been using it in the real world to solve real problems. Anybody who's not met me before, I'm an MVP for, I think it's 14 years now. I'm based up in Newcastle. I blog a lot, do a bit of YouTube. I help Sarah Vanner, I give him a lot of advice from the field in how we should develop the Serverless 360 product. I'm also a really keen golfer, so if anybody's into golf, please come and chat to me about that, because we can't talk about Azure all week. Integration platforms. So, we talk about Azure integration services. Microsoft are really accelerating this. There's been challenges for a few years about explaining what the platform is, but if we look at the technologies that people are using, I often use a diagram a little bit like this to position what the different Azure features are, how they relate to the capabilities that you need for your integration platform. The big thing to note here, it's not just Logic Apps. Logic Apps plays a really core part of it, but other people are solving real-world integration problems with combinations of these technologies. And the big challenge is about how do you create the ability to monitor. It's not just monitoring, there's also operations. How do you manage these business transactions? And how do you manage them across these technologies? And that's where we think BAM comes into play. BAM is a module within Serverless 360 we've had for a few years. Now, the challenge that Serverless 360 tries to address, we always focus on this idea that support's difficult. It has been for years. In BizTalk world, it still is in Azure. We find that in Azure, most of the support ends up going to the developers, to the experts, to the Azure people who end up spending more time doing support, which stops them building new stuff. So our aim is to kind of build modules in Serverless 360 that'll help us shift that support left. So we've got these 4 modules, and the one we're going to talk about today is this one down here, this business activity monitoring. The idea is that the more we can let business users self-service interfaces, the more we can let level 1, level 2 support people do stuff, because let's face it, it's really difficult for them to participate in the solutions that you build. The more we shift support left, the more your developers can build new stuff. Everybody in the room is going to be wanting to build new features, going to do BizTalk migrations. So the amount of support you're going to have is going to go up because you're going to be supporting BizTalk and Logic Apps and Azure. So we need to free these people up to build new stuff. Just in the interest of time for lunch, I'm going to skip over that one a little bit. Now, what I really wanted to talk about was real-world examples. So what is it that you can do with BAM, and what have we done in the real world? So here's an example from one of the customers that I work with about employee self-service. So I think this idea of something like new employees join the company, they get set up in a system, that syncs to all the other systems, and then you've got the ongoing maintenance to synchronize employees. That's a great use case everybody probably has, but it's equally applicable to things like orders, customers, etc., etc. So in this case, we've been working on this project where we integrate into multiple systems. In fact, we'll just look at the diagram here. So we integrated with SAP SuccessFactors. We've got Logic Apps and APIM that work together to pull data out of SuccessFactors, and we publish it to Service Bus. So we've got pub sub messaging from Service Bus, and when a new user joins, we have this create user use case here where we've got functions, Logic Apps, APIM work together. We integrate with Active Directory to create a new user in AD. We then, after the user's been provisioned, we then do this pub sub pattern, which drives multiple other integrations. So we've got a few things which are quite interesting about things like some default groups we want people to be configured in based on a few rules. We've got this interface here where the user needs a mailbox activation process. So there's a whole bunch of PowerShell that the admin team have got that we need to trigger when a user joins, and it does a whole bunch of magic behind the scenes. So one of the great things, this to me is a use case where we start spanning integration developers and IT ops. So we've got the PowerShell developed by IT ops. we build a logic app and it integrates with an automation account, triggers the PowerShell on one of their VMs and goes and does that bit of magic for us. But then we've got more classical integrations like the learning system or the benefit system where it's just pub sub, we get a message and we process it in. So the big challenge, right, if you think about this, we've got, at least 5 interfaces just on this diagram, but in the real world, that's going to grow over time as you add more systems. How do you get that holistic view? You know, if I go to the Logic App Designer, I can see the run history and I can see one Logic app, but the question is, if Mike joins the company, which systems did Mike not get set up correctly? And so when he turns up on the first day, he can log into the learning system, but he doesn't know anything. The benefit system doesn't know who he is. They're the kind of real world problems. And that really is where BAM comes in. So what we can do here, when we add the BAM module, is we can have these integrations where they can sort of send their BAM events. And these are things like, you know, it's not just the low-level diagnostic. It's here's a user that we've received the message to create them. Here's an error we got processing them. Yes, they were successfully created. These key sort of business valuable milestones to tell people what's going on. So the idea is we can push that into serverless 360 and we can let people who aren't developers be able to manage these transactions. So I kind of want to show a little bit what that would actually look like. And here we've got the serverless 360 homepage, and you can see we've got these 4 modules that map to the slide at the start where we've got our kind of 4 key product areas. And if we go into BAM here, the first thing you notice is on the left, we've got this tree view that you can kind of open out. And if you're a business user, so for example, in this company, we've got this team called HR Tech, who are HR experts who also understand how their systems work. They know about things like success factors. They know about the learning system. They don't even really know what a logic app is. They would never be able to understand how to support a logic app. So we can create this organizational structure here where I've got the HR department. I can create transactions in there so they can go in and say, oh, we've got person synchronization. And I can design here a bunch of views of these transactions. So for example, if you take my new hire one, in fact, I think new hire Active Directory, this might be a logic app that might have 100 steps in it. There might be a lot of work to do this, but the user doesn't care about that. They just want to know things like, did we trigger this process? Did it complete successfully? What I actually did with this one is there's a few common error scenarios. So things like a manager lookup's a common problem where they might not have set a user up and we might find the manager lookup fail. So I can show them how far through the process they got. And then the idea is that from a runtime perspective, you can go into the tracking module and you can just see who's going through the system here. So for example, if you take the IDs here, you might go, right, we've got this new user. You might do a search for this ID. So if we grab that. Forgetting I've got my laptop here and it's in the keyboard format. So I can go and find all of the messages related to that one user. Now they're all different logic apps, so you can see here if we look at the transaction, you know, we've got the mailbox activation, the add user to group. One of the things I find out in the real world is just adding some columns here to tell the business user which systems are involved in these interfaces. So things like Service Bus to Active Directory, they kind of get that concept, but they might find, you know, the lower level concepts in the implementation are just too different to what they're used to. But they can go and see, oh, you know, this is what happened to Lindsay. One of these might have got an error. And then in Serverless 360, we're trying to build these added value features. So you might want to go and reprocess a message. So say the mailbox activation failed. You might go, let's go and reprocess that. If I've got a reprocessing step set up, it'll go and drop it back, so it might trigger a logic app. There's a few different ways you can configure this. You might drop it onto a queue, drop a file to an FTP site. You know, if you were doing something like Martin and Bill's example, you might let people see flat files and push them back to an FTP site for reprocessing if you repair the data. And the idea is just to give you those features on top. Now, we also add other things. Actually, just noticed there that one's marked as a reprocess there, so you can see we have a real concept in Serverless 360 about understanding what work you've got left to do as a support person. So things like logic apps, we often find it's difficult to know out of the 10 failures which ones you've actually sorted out and which ones are still left to work with. So in BAM, we've got the ability to show you which ones you've said, I can ignore this, which ones you've reprocessed. And then if you've got any errors, so I maybe haven't got any errors ready in this demo, but you would see them in the action required list here to show you they're the things that had problems that I haven't sorted out yet. Now, what you can also do, if you think about these added value features on top of what Azure platform gives you, we've also got things like in the monitoring area, you can see here I've got all the different issues that I've had over the time. So I've currently got one open issue, and I'm currently in a warning state. If you notice, I'm yellow on the left-hand side there. So I can manage the issues that I've got. These would have been triggered by the monitoring, so I can acknowledge it, close it, and show that I'm in a good, healthy state. And then when it comes to monitoring, so we've got a whole bunch of different kinds of things you can do with monitoring. So you could do a query monitor, where you could do something like, here's a query that looks for, how many messages fail to go to AD, and I can set that query up and trigger the monitoring based on that query. But I can also do some really cool things as well. So things like duration monitoring is a common problem we have. So here I could go and look for one of my transactions. So we have a problem with a mailbox one actually sometimes. And you can see here I've set up so the PowerShell activation piece. In the real world, what happens is this PowerShell script's not as robust as we'd really like it to be. So sometimes the logic app triggers it from the automation account, and it may just not reply for ages. So we know that we want to check that out. So I can say, right, if this shape in my BAM process takes more than, so I think I've got it configured as 14 minutes there. If it takes more than 14 minutes to run, I actually want to trigger an alert for somebody to go and look at this problem. That's really difficult to do on Azure for most of the Azure features, a function, a data factory, a logic app. If they're taking too long to run, it's kind of difficult to spot that because they haven't errored yet. They're just sat there doing nothing. So they're the kind of things that we're trying to build here. The things like the dashboard. So here what we're trying to do is create a dashboard where you just get this overview of what's going on. You can customize this to add your own widgets. And it's really like, I come in as a business user, I want to see what's my process done. Let's remember these business processes, they're not owned by the integration team, they're owned by the business people who these transactions sort of do work for. So that lets them see, is it working well? Am I having regular problems? Do I want to complain about it, invest some money to sort some things out? And it's about giving them visibility of what's going on. Okay, so with, I guess the one bit maybe with this, so if we have a look in the logic apps here, so we have an action that we can support where you can send a message to BAM. So here, this is my mailbox activation one. So I've got my logic app receives a message from service bus. I then have this start transaction shape. So I'm usually saying, here's the business process. Here's the step that I'm at in that transaction. So if we go back over here and look in my tracking, okay, so if I go my new hire, I think it's the one with the more steps in. So you can see here I've got these steps light up. Now, if you send an event that you haven't got a shape for, so this is one of the things we added a little while ago, you'll see events just show up here in a list, and they would show as tick when they're mapped, means they show up in the diagram, and if they're not mapped to a diagram shape, they'll still show up in the list. So it makes it easy for you to just set your transaction up, go and send all your data, and then you can go and fill the diagram in later. We think it's quite a good way of doing it. But here I can see all the shapes that I've executed, and then in the logic app, there'll basically just be a shape where it's saying start the transaction. Here I'm checkpointing that I've started the mailbox activation. For anybody who's not familiar, these are the actions that do the automation account integration. So there's a connector for that, which is quite cool. And then depending on the result, I'll either just say, yeah, it failed, or yeah, it passed. And then that's what drives all the BAM activity, is these actions. So it's really easy to configure, set up. You just add the connectors to do it. So from our perspective, if you think of what does this actually mean, so we've made it easier for people to see what's going on. Now this week we've got this systems actually in UAT testing at the moment. Really important project. You know, this success factors setup's really key to the business. But I'm actually here talking to you guys. This is going on in Canada at the minute, and the big difference that BAM offers, you know, it's all about giving the people self-service and visibility of what's going on. So really our integration team can take a step back from that testing. You know, if you saw me talk about automated testing last week, so when we do our automated testing, last year at Integrate, we're very confident that the interfaces work when they go into the test environment. So really that combined with BAM lets us take that step back. The business analysts work with the business. They go and build and test the solution, and they just check what's going on in BAM, and then very occasionally they'll give us a shout and ask us to have a look at something where they don't understand what the problem is. You know, the reality is in most cases, issues that they see are because some bit of data has not been configured in a system, and the integration logged the error for them. You know, we all used to joke BizTalk was the best error logging system you'll ever buy for your enterprise. It's the same thing with Azure Logic Apps and Azure integration services. We're catching these errors when systems haven't been set up correctly. The business just can't see them to do something about it. Next up, we've got a data platform. So I said at the start, Azure Integration Services isn't just logic apps. It's not just functions. It's that wider platform. So as part of the infrastructure and architecture we've been building, we've also got a big investment in enterprise data platforms, and we use Azure Synapse. We have a lot of different integrations with involving Synapse as well. So the idea is our transactional integrations go through logic apps, API management service buses. Our bulk type big data integrations go through Synapse, and we kind of use the two platforms to work together to solve a lot of our problems. So we had, one of the examples we had was users in Synapse. So we have data coming in from different systems, and they're building reports and they're spitting stuff out to SharePoint for business users in Excel. But those big pipelines, they don't have any visibility of if they actually work. So how does the business user know when they go to SharePoint to see their spreadsheet that they expect to see, giving them the daily calculations, they're not there? What happened? Was there a problem? So straight away that results in an IT support call, which then goes up, and nobody can do anything with it till it gets to the developer. You know, let's face it, this is the story in most orgs. Developer goes and has a look and goes, oh, the pipeline's still running, wait 10 minutes. That's a lot of money you've spent getting to that point. So what we can do with Synapse, is we can do the same thing with pipelines. So here's my architecture where you see I've got 3 inputs coming into my data platform. So on the left over here, we've got the typical pipeline type ingestion where we're connecting to databases and systems and pulling in bulk data feeds on a regular basis. But we also have a really cool integration via event hubs, which uses Event Hub and Capture to write files to the data lake. And then we have Synapse pipelines and Spark jobs that kick off, that process that data. So that's one of the ways where we get a lot of our transactional data from logic apps, service bus, etc., coming in and supporting what we're doing in Synapse. And then we also have these file integrations here which sync user interaction through SharePoint, syncs into the data lake and stuff. But all these things, it's the same problem. You know, they're all behind the scenes, hidden away. How do you know what's going on? So here we can send events from the pipeline to be able to tell the user the same thing. You know, this is what's happening. And you know, if we take a look at Serverless 360, so here I've got in my enterprise data platform area. This is the Event Hub bit. So I've got this pipeline that processes these Avro files from the Event Hub, and it runs on, I think I've got it for cost reasons, in my demo I've got it running on a daily basis, but in the real world you can make it trigger from the event from the file getting written, so you might have it running really frequently. And if this just stops working, the business doesn't really know, and you know, let's face it, the likelihood is your IT support team probably doesn't know. until somebody goes along and says, oh, that data hasn't refreshed for 3 days, what's going on? And then you realise that actually the pipeline never ran because nobody really knew, and and you get all these kind of problems. So here I've got the same idea. I can see the pipelines running. I can click on it. I can see it started and finished. If there was a problem with it, I can see details from the pipeline itself. So I've got things like the pipeline ID, so I could search for it in Synapse if I wanted to. And I don't know if anyone's actually seen Synapse before. So here's my demo Synapse workspace. So if you're familiar with Data Factory, there's a lot of similarities between it. Synapse is really, Data Factory is kind of the pipeline equivalent, but then you also have this box with Spark pools and a few other things in. And here I've got this Event Hub pipeline where I've just got these web activities. So you can see here is the one that starts it. This one here triggers the notebook to go and process the files. And here I've got a checkpoint at the end. So these are just really simple activities, the equivalent of the Logic App connector, pushing an event out to BAM to say, I've started, I've done my piece, I've reached this point in my process. So again, it's fairly easy to add this on top. And this, when we did these kind of integrations, it just gives the business that visibility of what's going on. They just had no idea before that. Doing time-wise. So the next one I want to talk about is Power Automate. So a lot of companies use Power Automate. I guess there's really interesting discussions about when do you use Power Automate, when do you use Logic Apps, etc. The two most common ones I've come across are Dynamics. People use Power Automate because it's in the ecosystem that they're comfortable with. The other one is people who build sort of low-code apps. They're in that Power Platform space. It's just natural for them to use Power Automate. We've got loads of Power Platform apps. But the challenge is that the same as Logic Apps, but probably worse, because sometimes the IT department doesn't even really know that they're there. That's whole stealth IT challenge. I'd argue Logic Apps have a better support story, certainly in my experience, a better support story than Power Automate, because you've got all of what Azure gives you. That higher abstraction in Power Automate, you just don't really have some of the stuff that you can do with Logic Apps. But with Power Automate, it's from a BAM perspective, we can do the same thing. So we have this one where we've got a flow where I've got rail cars go out, they have products in, they get delivered, they send events through our integration platforms. That's really this bit over here. One of the interfaces is that they load that data into the Dataverse, which drives a customer portal and a sales team's back-end app with CRM. So the CRM team have this use case where they want users to be able to trigger getting a document email to them. So this is really a bit like a receipt. You go in as a user, you can see that your rail car's been delivered. You might want to click a button and just get a PDF saying what's going on. So that's a really, firstly, there's a really good architecture question, which maybe people want to have a chat offline about would you build that in Logic Apps or integration platform, or would you build it in the Power Platform ecosystem? We felt that actually it's really in that application space rather than the enterprise integration space. So we felt it was a good use case for Power Automate. But that can trigger from the Dataverse, triggers your Power Automate flow. You can look up some data here from the Dataverse. You might get a template here from SharePoint of what you want the document to look like. You can generate the doc and then you can email it to the customer. Now, the problem we've got is that happens, but nobody really knows there's a problem. The customer might not get their email. They come and raise a support ticket saying, I've clicked this button 4 times, but I've never had my email. I haven't got a clue what's going on. The customer manager's sat over here. He's got a customer complaining to him. So straight away you're getting reputational damage. You're getting a bad experience. From an integration team perspective, we've got an angry customer manager. He raises his support ticket over here, and the IT support guy as well. I don't know. I don't have access to Azure. I can't see what's going on. Azure's too complicated for me. Or Power Platform's too complicated for me even. I need to escalate it. The reality is with Power Platform stuff, it's going to go right back to whoever built the app to look at it, and they're going to troubleshoot that. But again, with BAM, we can just send checkpoints from the flow to serverless 360 BAM, and then suddenly you've got visibility. We can start monitoring the transaction. So if it fails, if it takes too long, we can start getting the same support experience that we've got for our Logic apps and our Syn apps, but for Power Automate. So just to show how easy that is, here I've got my flow. So my rail car arrived. If I go into the edit here, so hopefully the internet will load this up really quickly. So here you can see what I actually did is we can take the Swagger from serverless 360. We just set up a Power Platform connector which lights up an action for us to be able to send data. And then I can just do the exact same shapes that I would have done in a Logic app. You can notice here I can send message bodies, message headers, and I'm kind of saying, look, here's a transaction that started. Here's an update to tell you we've generated. Think about that process. So where are things likely to go wrong? So, if I can't generate the document, the chances are there's actually a problem with the data. Maybe somebody renamed the SharePoint template and it can't look up that template. Maybe it had a problem sending the email because the account's expired or something like that. They're places that might make sense to put a checkpoint, because you can articulate to the business user some problem they can fix themselves without having to raise that support ticket. That Joe from the team went in and renamed the file this morning. Well, we can get them to fix that and there's no ticket. That's really what we're trying to do here, is reduce that support overhead, lower the costs, make these integrations visible. Okay, so we also had this really interesting one as well. We've got API management capability that you can send to BAM. So we had this scenario where we had outsourcing of parts of IT. So we had a vendor who started helping us with help desk, but they've got their own help desk system. We've already got a help desk system. They need to be integrated, and because they're a partner, they want to do all that integration for us. They just need to allow us to be able to connect to our help desk system. So it was a really interesting project because there was networking challenges, because our help desk system was on premise, theirs is in their organization. How do you connect the two? So we were able to do API management. We pulled in the API for the on-premise app and just proxied through to the help desk system. So this diagram shows a little bit what it looks like, and we've got the partner who has this this little component over here that calls our API, gets the latest tickets, updates them. Works really nice, actually. Really good APIM use case there. But the challenge for us was APIM's great because we get all this data from App Insights about what's going on and stuff, but sometimes our business users just want to know what the progress of tickets are, and is the integration actually working and that kind of thing. And what we're able to do with APIM policy is we can just put some policy widgets in here that would send a BAM event. So this opens up a lot of opportunities for people who are doing APIM entry to their integrations. If you have one where you just need that bit more than App Insights, so maybe one of the examples would be you want to capture a message body, make that available to a user. So if you have an order gets submitted and you want the user to be able to repair and resubmit that order, that's a great way of pushing it out to BAM. They can go, they spelt the name of a customer wrong or something like that. They can resubmit it from the support team. So what that would look like is over here, we've got this send request policy in APIM. So I'd love it if it was a little bit nicer, to look at on the screen here. But really, all we're doing is have our request comes in, it goes through the policy, and it gets to this send request. And what we're doing is we're kind of crafting some headers, a URL. So you can see here, from the named values, I've just picked up my serverless 360 URL. We fire it start transaction event, we stick some headers on it, we put some metadata, and we flow a body, and that'll create the BAM event. So here, if we look back at BAM, so where are we? Help desk over here. Now, if you notice in the tree, one of the things that you're seeing is these are totally different implementations of integrations, and that's really deliberate in my demos. 1 minute we're Synapse, then we're Power Automate. business users don't care about that. They just want to see something that represents their organization. So here, right next to the, this one's an IT department feature. Right next to that Synapse one, we've got the help desk one here. I can go and see all of the, all the tickets are for me because it's a demo. But I can see here, this ticket, we've had it start off, and you can see the ticket's created, and we're waiting for the event to come back to tell me the ticket's loaded. Now these API calls, they may actually happen across a week in duration, 2 weeks. That ticket might not be closed straight away. And I think that's a really key BAM scenario is, right, we think about telemetry, things like App Insights. We're used to these things being a sort of semi-synchronous transaction where it comes in and it completes in a few seconds and goes away. For BAM, think about Martin's demo previously of EDI files. It's not uncommon that files might take days to come back. How do you correlate that data to create this connected up view? And that's really what BAM's about, is about business correlation to create the business transaction. So if you think, even though we've got APIM instead of logic apps here, we've still got all the same features. So we can configure repair and resubmit points. We can configure, I could do that duration monitoring that we had for a logic app before. I could do that here as well, even though it's API calls. I could say, well, if there's been 3 days where we haven't had an update for that ticket, we could trigger that to say, oh, actually, there might be something wrong here. And we go back, if you think of the slide, I think it was the previous slide, actually, our angry little customer manager at the bottom, we can spin the support model around, and instead of sitting there waiting for them to come shouting at us, we can go, oh, we've spotted that something might not be right here. Do you want to go and check with your business partner because they haven't requested an update for this ticket for 3 days? That's a totally different experience for our integration customers. He'll be happy because he can service his customers better. And I think that's really what we want integrations to be like. Okay, so time-wise, just checking the clock. So I'm going to just cut the demos back and talk about the architecture a little bit now, I think, just for everybody's lunch. So here we've got a data factory one. So we had a scenario, branch offices submit data to head office, and we decide, right, we want to use Data Factory to process this data. Now, I could have used Synapse. There's great discussions about when would you use a Synapse pipeline versus a Data Factory pipeline versus a Microsoft Data Fabric pipeline. I think is going to be the new discussion point as well. From a support perspective, that's just the implementation. The concept's the same, though. So here we've got the partners submit to SFTP. So this is where for my demo, I used Azure Storage, and tomorrow in our cost analyzer demo, you'll see how I accidentally spent a lot more money than I was intending, and we'll show you how cost analyzer helped me figure that out. But here I've got my data comes over SFTP, it triggers my data factory here, and it loads it. And we just do the same thing we did with Synapse. And actually, because the implementation for Data Factory and Synapse is so similar, it's actually exactly the same to set it up. You just use that web activity, send your event to tell the pipeline started, send an event to say there was a problem or everything's successful, and you've got the same support experience. So again, the support operators, we're not training them all these different technologies because that's difficult. We're just teaching them to use the support tool. Okay, so if we wrap this up, key points then. So I guess Rick always says this, which I always, whenever I think about the platform versus product thing, I always remember when Rick brought that up one day when we were chatting. This whole centralized business operations and self-service across the entire AIS estate, that's what people want. The entire AIS estate isn't just logic apps, it's everything else. Actually, do you know what? It's not just Azure, it's also Power Platform for a lot of companies. We want the ability to track, trace, we want action required, repair, resubmit, various flavors of monitoring, and that's what we're trying to offer with Serverless 360. Here, there's an example of some of the different data sources we can feed BAM events from. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit about BizTalk. So we've got a session about if you're a BizTalk customer, how can Serverless 360 help? We'll talk a little bit about there. But you know what, right? Let's be clear as well. Azure customers use Azure to build apps. They build, whatever solutions they're building. But some of them don't use AIS. Some of them might be using MuleSoft. I've got a customer who's using SAP BTP iFlows. The BAM API could be used from these other vendors. So if you're an Azure customer and you might be building a data platform with Synapse or Data Factory or something else, but if you're using Boomi, well, hey, you know what? Wouldn't you like to have a single support experience across those tools? And I think we could achieve that with BAM. We all know from BizTalk days, the biggest competitor to BizTalk was custom code. I can write C# code, Python code. You could push an event to our BAM API, so you could create that joined up experience, which I think is where we want. I think there might be one question everybody wants to ask. If there's others, please come to the booth. Does anybody have any questions now at all? Rick's got a question because I asked him to ask me this question. Rick asked me a question in the pub last night, and I said, if nobody asks a question tomorrow, ask me this question today. So I'll let you.
So I'm still kind of looking at it. Given what we heard yesterday about the Azure team implementing their own BAM, if I'm a new customer, if you were starting again, If you were starting again, given what we learned yesterday about the Azure team's BAM, would you still build with Serverless 360, or do you think that keeping it within Azure and Azure Monitor and APIM is App Insights is a better bet?
Yeah. So I think that let's face it, Microsoft said yesterday, we've got this BAM thing we're thinking about doing. I think that's a really great question for us at Covi, and about the direction of Serverless 360. I actually really like what Microsoft are doing, and I think it's a really good thing for us, and I'd like to just explain why. I guess the couple of things are, number one, it validates the use case for BAM. So we've done BAM for years. Let's face it, Microsoft have done BAM since BizTalk 2006, maybe 2004, probably. So there's a couple of things what that means. Number one, Microsoft need BAM to be able to tick the box for customers that addresses a sales blocker. They absolutely need that. So number one, we know we need BAM. The question then becomes, what does Serverless 360 offer on top of what Microsoft do? So there's a couple of things here. So number one, the slight elephant in the room is Microsoft are showing us slides this week. It's going to be a V1 in a year. It may be usable a bit after that. Customers need BAM right now, so that's point number one. We've had our BAM out there for a couple of years. It's delivering success straight away. So that's one timing issue that I think we help. But the other thing, and if any, just a quick shout out. So we've got a guy from our engineering team called Aaron Prabhu, who really good guy to have a chat to. If anybody wants to chat about how to build cloud apps, go and have a chat with Aaron. But Aaron's team, when they build BAM, they've got a lot of challenges to address in how you do BAM. So the biggest problem is, if you think about the session I did at Integrate a few years ago about log analytics and app insights, there's a lot of hard work to get that telemetry data from logic apps to be used for anything useful. So I showed how, I run a logic app. It's not that complicated, but I get like 100 events come out, but I only care about one of them. And if you scale that up across thousands of runs a day, what we find is that 99.99 whatever % of the events that come out from the telemetry, the business user doesn't care about. So from a vendor perspective, the cost of processing them events to get rid of the noise is a really big problem. That's probably our biggest problem in BAM, which is why we went the route of, we put the API in first so you can explicitly tell us where a business event happens. And then we've played around over the years with using the telemetry feed from the diagnostic feed that you can do onto an event. And we thought, well, could we just use that so people don't have to build BAM in the designer? But the problems are, one, the volume of events, It's really expensive to process them when you don't care about most of it. But also it's quite awkward to craft the data into something that you'd want it to look like, and you don't get the message bodies, for example, is a big problem. So I think what we'd like to do is we want Microsoft to deal with the hard work. So if they can do that hard work of the event processing, and let's face it, the BAM UI for BizTalk's years old, it's horrendously awful and nobody would use it. And actually in BizTalk 360, we built a module on top of BAM so that people could use it. And I think that's where we'd like to get to is, Microsoft are going to get us 60% of the way there. We see that with a mapper, we see that with a Logic App Designer on V3. The community get us a bit further, and then there's that space for ISVs who get you that last mile. And I think that's where Saravana wants Covite to be in both the BizTalk 360 world and the serverless 360 world, is we get you that last mile to be what you really need. And I think that if we can focus more of our investment on less of that plumbing piece, I think, to me, I think there's still a need for that plumbing piece for certain use cases, because you want that higher value of, there's things we can do, like we get messages coming in, but we can also process the message body and extract data out at runtime. So there's scenarios I've had where the business go, we really wish we could track this based on this value in the message. And they're expecting me to say, that would take us, another release and a bunch of change and that. And I go, all right, we can just do that. And bam, we write a query that finds that property from the message body, and 10 minutes later they can track it. That's the kind of things we've tried to do with our BAM. But if Microsoft can make us spend our investments less on the under the hood stuff and more on the added value, that's really where we are. So I think that, to me, both is the answer. We want both.
I mean, would it be fair to say, Mike, that one, a bit of competition isn't a bad thing, and two, actually, you might find that both the products complement each other, and that there is synergy potentially between what is coming down the pipeline that could enrich Serverless 360.
Yeah, I think the one of the things is going to be the big challenge for Microsoft is this week I've got people who've never used Azure using Serverless 360 to support our interfaces. People who don't even belong to the IT department. I'm not sure how Microsoft convinced them to log into the Azure portal and navigate to a resource group and find a integration space with BAM in it. I think that's the challenge they've got to address. But if we can just have that piece on top, and then we go, you want to go to the next level down, and they click a button and it opens it up and they send it to the developer with the Microsoft BAM piece for one level down. That's where I think the two work together. Cheers. Feel free to come and chat to us at the booth. Hope everybody enjoys the lunch. Thanks for listening.